Hey, hello, hi. Welcome to and or back to the EquiTheory podcast. I am your host, Jill Treese, and this week's episode, we are covering 25 things I wish I had known sooner in my work with horses. So maybe you'll learn something. Maybe you'll consider something. But I'm doing this because I just turned 25, so it seemed like we'll throw it back to the YouTuber roots, and it'll give me something to talk about. And reflecting on this was really interesting because it took me to some places that I hadn't connected all the dots before. But there are like 4 main little regions we'll be covering. I sort of grouped the points because I don't know, they all sort of like blend together, but have different little features, but some things I was just generally wrong about and misled about, some systemic issues in the horse world, some quotes that have really shaped and led me in my journey with horses, and some perspective shifts that I've had that I think are or have been rather monumental for me. So I'm going to share those with you. So let's just get into it. All right, you guys, before we get into the meat of the episode, we must do ads first. But if you would like to listen to these episodes ad-free, you can become a member at Superscript. You can click the link in the description below or become a subscriber on Spotify by just subscribing in app. And you'll also get access to asking questions, to have members-only episodes where I cover your question in your very own episode. Beyond that, there's also listener submissions down below. You can click that link to submit your own question for me to answer in like an end of the episode little advice segment. It's not quite a whole episode, but sort of me giving my thoughts on just a little topic, a little advice, but not like do the training formal. You get it, but like whatever. So yeah, let's roll the ads. All righty. So 25 things that I wish that I knew sooner with horses. So yeah, like I said, this is coming at you because your girl is 25. Crazy. Time has flown. I think when did I start this podcast? I think it was 2020, right? So it was 4 years ago. So it was like 21. Pretty crazy how things have changed. And as it sort of winds down, I feel like it's nice to have some closing thoughts, So why don't we just get into this? So the first little category I have here is sort of things that I just had wrong for one reason or another, but just things that were sort of commonplace, commonly said, commonly believed, and were not either true or were not all the way true, or were just sort of accepted as this like dogmatic belief. So number 1, they wouldn't do it if they didn't want to, is a myth. So there was this, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but growing up in a competitive environment for horses, there was always this idea that horses enjoyed their job, that they loved it, because if they did not, then they would not do it, which is sort of a straw man, sort of not a real argument, because it's like that's really the only possible explanation. The only reason horses are jumping over things is because they love it and they enjoy it, and not because we carry whips and spurs and manipulate their front end with a bit, and we employ corporal punishment if they do not do what we ask. I'm sure that has nothing to do with it, right? So that was a big one. Very difficult to grapple with mentally, that perhaps my horses were not always competing because they enjoyed it. I mean, I would like to believe on some level that they had a good time, that they enjoyed it, but there are lots of things to consider, right? I mean, I did eventing. So at an event, you take the horse off property, away from their home, away from their herd. You put them in a stall all weekend. with constant lights, people, sounds from other horses, cars driving past, golf carts, motorbikes, all of the things. Constantly confronted with all of these sounds. It's not very peaceful. So they probably don't rest super well all weekend. And then they're in a box all weekend. And traveling multiple hours is really hard on a horse's stomach and their bodies, and their nervous system. So, and then to go like compete with the current, or the training methods that I was using at the time, very traditional, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, very coercive. And like, don't get me wrong, there is such a large part of me that loves my sport, and I still really identify with it because it is a huge part of who I was and my journey with horses. And I really did enjoy the sport, and it gave me something that I am forever grateful for, just that outlet and that expression, that dopamine, and just feeling like I was good at something, like I had a partner in my horse, and it was just fun. Looking back, there's some that's like, oh, that's a little bit difficult to grapple with, but I think, it's something that I can still appreciate and hold dear and identify with as a part of myself, but also want to push for, to see some changes that are more ethical. So the idea that the horse would not compete if they didn't want to is not necessarily the most right-headed approach, because, like I said, the setup is not, I think, if the horses could choose what they want. So yeah. And like, it's certainly better in some areas, right? You don't have to stall the horse the entire weekend. If you're close enough, you just trailer in, you compete, and then you go home, which is more ideal. There are little things that could be done, but especially in eventing, the sport is just really not set up to be able to do that. Like for me in Arkansas, I mean, sometimes we were trailering 7 hours, so we can't obviously do that at the end of every event. So you have to stay the whole weekend. But yeah, so that's number one. Number two, the concept of respect is often conflated or confused with the concept of obedience. So, people would always say, oh, the horse doesn't respect you. He doesn't respect your leg. He doesn't respect the bit. He doesn't respect the fence, meaning jump. He doesn't, he's not respectful of your space. He's rude, blah, blah, blah. All of this stuff. If the horse turns his hind end to you in the round pen, he's being disrespectful, which is like, in all of those scenarios where we're upset that the horse is not being obedient, not that the horse is being disrespectful. They're two different things. So respect is more of a concept about admiration and wanting to please, and and that can be part of obedience, right? But respect is more ooey gooey. I feel like for this, it might actually be helpful to look up the real deal definition of respect because it's so mushy gushy in the horse world. A feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements. Due regard for the feelings, wishes, rights, and traditions of others. So there you go. Synonyms include admiration, approval, appreciation. Okay, so these are horses, or feelings, emotions, horses that we know of are not able to conceive of. They do not have a frontal lobe for processing such things, such complex things, and that is anthropomorphic personification of horses to expect them to understand this really complex, multifaceted concept, right? So what we're looking for when we say the horse doesn't respect your leg is the horse is not obeying your leg. The horse is not responding. So in that case, if you were asking for like a leg yield and you put your inside leg on and the horse moves into the pressure, the horse is not obeying the cue or the command to move away from the pressure. So there are a couple of reasons for disobedience, right? It could be that's uncomfortable, that hurts, I'm afraid, I don't want to, or I don't know, I'm confused. So to say the horse is not respecting is to say that the horse is, a petulant child that needs discipline, and it's a shortcut to justifying harsher training methods and force. So if you replace it with the word obedience, it makes a lot more sense. Like the horse is not obeying, whatever it is. So the whole respect thing is so deeply embedded into the culture with horses, but it doesn't really have a place there. If anything, it needs to be the humans respecting the horses, because there's a lot of disrespect going the other way. It's very projecty. If you're familiar with the concept of projection, you sort of, like your insecurities and your fears, you sort of put that in something else, usually someone else, and you say, if you're disrespecting someone by taking away their autonomy, say with horses, and then the horse doesn't do what you want them to do, and you say, you are being disrespectful to my wishes, my autonomy, you're invading my space, you're being disrespectful when you are the one that is being disrespectful. So very interesting on that. But yeah, it just gets thrown around with everything that is all about respect. And I would like to see it come from the human first in a true sense. And then, then let's talk about the horse. Okay. Number 3, punishment only teaches horses to conceal those things. So what I was just talking about, to punish the horse only tells them, conceal what you're worried about, what you're afraid of, what hurts, what's uncomfortable, or what you're confused about. It does not teach the animal that was wrong. It does in some sense, right? So in the leg yield example, the horse pushes into the leg and you smack him on the shoulder with the whip. You've punished moving into the leg, but the horse doesn't learn, oh, I'm supposed to move away from the leg. The horse might do that as a response to the pain, and then it gets released, and then you sort of get this perhaps negative reinforcement wrapped up within in the positive or punishment. But it is not teaching the horse what to do instead. So that's the huge issue with punishment, right? It doesn't tell the animal or the learner, because this is true for humans too, it doesn't tell them what to do instead. So, you're tacking up and your horse, you go to tighten the girth and the horse bites at you and you smack them on the shoulder. You've just told them, don't tell me that is uncomfortable, that hurts, that you don't like that surprised you. Don't communicate to me. And then you create a very dangerous horse because now they're unpredictable, they're reactive because they know they're going to get punished for reacting, but they can't help but react. You often see horses that when they do that, when they bite at you for girthing them up, they almost reel back, like expecting you to hit them. So they're already like flinching before you even move, even if you don't hit them. And they're because they're expecting that, but they don't know how else to sort of communicate. And sometimes it's a reflexive response and they're like, oh my God, that hurt. And they bite at you. And then they're like, oh my God, I'm going to get hit. And so they don't have an alternative. And it's up to us with the frontal lobe that can handle concepts such as respect and problem solving efficiently, and on a higher level than horses, to solve that with antecedent arrangement, take care of their management and their medication needs and see, do they have ulcers? Is something pinching in the saddle? Rather than just, being barbaric, frankly. And that horse's skin is arguably more sensitive than ours. They can feel flies land on them, and yet we beat them with whips and say that they're tough. But then we say they're sensitive because they can feel flies. It's cognitive dissonance. And I read this quote that I feel like really encapsulates that punishment only seeks to conceal, by Chaim Janot, I believe. Emotions do not vanish by being banished. So you can't just say, don't feel that way, or, oh, that hurt. Simply stop hurting, or you're wrong, or smack. It doesn't get rid of that emotion. It might temporarily replace it with a new one, such as fear, but it doesn't get rid of it. And so rather than aggressing, why don't we be addressing? Mic drop, you're welcome. Okay, number 4. This one was a big one for me personally. A little embarrassing to admit, but it's not cool or a badge of honor to ride a hot horse. So I did not play a role, at least intentionally, in making Zoe a quote-unquote hot horse. But she was always labeled hot, spicy, just big energy, really reactive and sensitive. Sensitive was the nice word. But it doesn't, like, I used to feel like it was reflective of me being a good writer, because people would always be like, oh, you handle her so well, you sit, all of that, you're such a good writer because you're so quiet even when she's doing all of that. But like, that's not, I'm just on a horse that's really uncomfortable and that is experiencing pain, anxiety, and I'm just continuing, like, doing nothing except forcing it to continue through that. Zoe was really the champ, the badge of honor through all of that, competing and being a rock star, while dealing with all of that and just being ignored and blown off. I was never harsh with her. I'm sure there were some times that, I got strong. There are definitely times that I was aggressive with her, seesawing the reins, or I rode in spur sometimes, but I never really, at least with her, knew that using like the whip and getting like super aggressive like I had with other horses in the past made it so much worse with her. So it was more like just trying to bottle everything. Oh my God, thinking about all that is just horrible, awful. And, we learn, we live and we learn. I just hate that that's the culture in the horse world. I have to accept my own responsibility for it. But to a degree, it's also when you're a child brought up in it and taught that this is the only way, and you slowly have your soft edges sharpened, and you become more and more aggressive, more and more desensitized, more and more able to just hit 100 and be aggressive. I don't know how much responsibility to take for that, or even my trainer should take for that, because this has been a long-standing issue in the horse world. It's far more systemic than any one trainer or rider. But yeah, it's not cool. It's not cool to be the rider of a horse that is in distress. It is much cooler to be quiet and soft in riding a horse that you basically don't have to move on. It looks like you're connected telepathically, that you think and the horse reacts, because you don't need to be loud with horses. You can be soft and quiet, and they are the same in return. So next here is 5. This was a big one for me also. It's not a disservice to, or a waste of the horse to not exploit their talent in athleticism. So for me, I always felt like with Zoe that I was doing her a disservice by not competing her at higher levels, because I had Olympians and trainers and people online and all these people saying Zoe is so talented, she can go all the way, she'll take you to Rolex. And that was huge for me. And I was like, that's amazing, this is great, let's do that. But I also felt like, I'm not in the financial situation, I'm not in the education situation with school. Like, I can't take off for months at a time to go to Florida and stay down there and train. And I was like, and then at a certain point I was like, maybe I don't want to go pro. I don't want to compete at the highest level. It scares me, and I'm comfortable at training level. Maybe I'd like to go to prelim, but not much higher than that. And I'm doing her a disservice. And I really considered selling her at one point because I was like, she is so much more talented than anywhere I'm willing to go, more talented than me. So, I'm not riding her well. I had a lot of self-doubt about how hot she was, and just being like, maybe I should just sell her. And an older, more educated rider would take her all the way, and that would be better for her because I'm wasting her talent. When the reality is, she's a horse. She does not have these grand dreams of being an Olympic athlete. She thinks about grass and companionship and scratches and breakfast, lunch, and dinner. She's not worrying about things that we humans project onto them. So the relationship is enough to be there for her, to care about her, to make sure her needs are met is enough. I wish I had known that long ago, that it is fine to have a talented horse and to just enjoy them. They do not have to go and do and be and whatever. They can just be. That it's okay to rest. I don't have to constantly be working and grinding 7 days a week. I can just enjoy the horse, and she can just enjoy being a horse. So yeah. Number 6, regulating bodies do not always safeguard the horse's best interest and welfare. So I used to justify like harsher bits, whips, and spurs. I was like, the FEI and like USEF would not allow us to use those things if they were harmful to the horse. Obviously, they wouldn't. Why would we be allowed to use things that are harmful? Not the case. So very much not the case. It's so not the case. It is about money and output. How many horses are you able to do? How many shows are you able to do? How much money are you able to make? It is not about the horse's welfare. It's tradition is not law, and it often fails to update with the current research, is number 7. So big talk growing up about how it's tradition. We do that because it's tradition, or that's the way it's always been done. This is how you train horses. This is how millions of people over millennia have trained horses. It's not law, and it often fails to consider current research. I remember growing up, it was really frustrating for me because I have always been like a little bit of a research nerd. And so I would look up things. And I remember like bringing positive reinforcement to my trainer and talking about, what positive reinforcement is, and explaining like, we've been using negative reinforcement this whole time. It's crazy. And getting back, no, we're not. That's not what it is. We are using positive reinforcement, which is like, bruh. Which is, it's number 8 on my list, that release does not equal reward. That was a huge one, that like we are using positive reinforcement. So when you release the pressure on the rein or on your leg, that's the reward. That's not a reward, that's a release. It is a removal of an aversive that reinforces behavior. So yes, it's a reinforcer, but it is not a reward. So, it's just that traditional mindset where you're rigidly adhering to something because that's just how it's always been done. You're not willing to consider new information and science and research as it grows and evolves. We have to learn to assimilate that with what we know and update our practices. And that just is reality. But to not do that leaves you in the dark ages and continuing to do things that we know are harmful. So I wish that I had known that. So number 9 is there's a difference in giving the horse a treat and training with positive reinforcement. So I remember back in the day, I always had, positive reinforcement people trainers commenting on my stuff, saying that I was, being harsh with my horse, that I should look into positive reinforcement. And I rolled my eyes and I was like, you're ridiculous, whatever. I'm not hurting my horse. Very defensive and protective, as I should be. I think that I'm doing what's best for my horse, and I'm very protective over that relationship. However, that needs to also come with some humility and some openness to, might I consider doing something else? Might I consider that something that I'm doing is harming my horse? And can I just change it? It doesn't have to be this big, earth-shattering deal that, I'm a horrible, awful person. But maybe that I just need to stop doing that, or maybe could start doing this. It's just, there's so much shame wrapped up in that. And that's another point further down the line. But, that I just remember being confronted with that and being like, I do use positive reinforcement because I give my horse a treat at the end of every ride, having no idea that just about all I'm reinforcing is standing in the cross ties after I've taken the saddle off. The horse has no idea that was about the ride, or the lesson that day. So the cherry on top approach, I give them a treat after this crazy long session, has nothing to do with reinforcing any of the behavior I wanted during the ride. It has everything to do with what's happening right then and there when I give them the treat. So number 10, management should be based on ethology and species appropriate care. So this was one that was about stalling and management practices. So horses don't prefer to be stalled. I always was brought up thinking that the fancy horses are inside. The competition horses, the special ones, are inside. Maybe the lesson horses are the ones that stay outside. The grade horses, not the thoroughbreds or the warm bloods. And so there's an elitism built in there, right? That it's, because stalls are generally more expensive. So if you can afford it and it's more expensive, it must be better, right? If that's what people who can afford it are doing, then that must be the way to go. If it costs more, it's better. Which is obviously not the case. That's very, again, projective humans. We prefer to be inside in climate-controlled environments, and, horses are adapted to be outside, to be moving, to be foraging, to be grazing, to be in a herd. And we could argue some of that is true of us as well, especially the socialization aspect. And we've done ourselves a bit of a disservice as well. But for the horses, it's not fair to be they prefer to be stalled. No, they're nice, cushy, warm stall, when it's not species appropriate care. And we know that because of things like stereotypies, and numerous studies on stress and what horses do naturally, how their bodies and systems are designed. So speaking of the design of their systems, that cereal grain is not ideal. Feeding 2 meals a day is not ideal. It creates some stress and is hard on their systems. It's much better to have a forage-based diet where they're having access to forage like hay and grass all day long, because of how their stomachs are set up, that they're constantly primed to digest. So it's not ideal to expect them to have all their needs met, once or twice a day. So, number 11 here, we're just about halfway through. My throat it kills me with these episodes. I don't know what the deal is. It's all of a sudden I've started recording and I just can't talk for that long. Is that metaphoric? Is that psychosomatic? I wonder. That I'm maybe it's time to retire the podcast and listen to sort of my body and my drive. I don't know. Interesting. I know I talked about that quite a bit in the last episode, so feel like I can share that. But anyway, okay, so number 11 sort of moves into my little quotes section here. So 11 is the one that anyone who listens to work stuff is well aware of. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. That, your thoughts and your perception create your reality. You're not your thoughts. you have control over them to some degree, obviously. A lot of thoughts are habits. It's habitual. If you continue to endorse them and to practice them, that's where those neural pathways are going to go. But you can work the opposite direction and create different ones. So if you stop approaching your horse like they're a disrespectful being and that they are, and change that to they're an honest being, they're just being who they are, and it's not an insult, it's not a judgment on you, it's just information, then it starts to be a little bit easier to approach them, and you see them very differently, and your treatment towards them is very different. So yeah. Number 12, this one comes from Heartland, Jack Bartlett of Heartland. If you have 5 minutes, it'll take all day, but if you have all day, it'll take 5 minutes. I have to remind myself this every single time I go to work with Azula. I'm like, you cannot rush it. Do you have time? Do you have the mental capacity? Do you have the energy? Are you able to be patient, or is it not a good time? All right, do you feel rushed? Can we take some deep breaths and resolve that, or are we stuck here? And then I proceed accordingly. It's a huge, huge thing, because when we rush, we tend to get a little bit feisty. Number 13 here is yield to win. So this is a term that I'm stealing from John and Julie Gottman in terms of their compromise model. They call it yield to win, that if you back off a little bit, if you concede, if you give some ground, then you're able to move towards compromise, towards winning. And the definition of winning sort of changes. Are you winning the argument, or are you winning the relationship as a team, that you're both able to move forward? And it's sort of that perspective thing again. So with horses, I see this in many, many ways. But one being like when you go to catch them, a horse that's really hard to catch, if you walk up to them and you see them slightly tip their head away from you, or bend down to itch their leg, or grab a bite of grass really fast, or have a worried eyebrow, with a lot of them, if it's really hard to catch, you might not even get anywhere close. But with a lot of them, if you notice any of that tension and you just stop, and maybe you even take a step or two back, and maybe you look at the ground or turn your body away just slightly, a lot of times that horse's head is going to snap back to you, and they're going to be like, you saw that, you noticed, you attuned. And a lot of times if you take like another step back after they do that, they might even approach you. And that would have saved me so much time and grief and just aggressing after horses and being like, you're going to run for me, then you're going to run. And instead just being like, oh, you're nervous. That's okay. I'm not a threat. I'll back off. And that's also part of that. If you have 5 minutes, it'll take all day. But if you have all day, it'll take 5 minutes. And my farrier, I think, witnesses this a lot, because he knows to just hang back while I go catch them, because if we try to corner them, it's going to take forever. But if he gives me a second and I can just walk up, and if they seem nervous, I'll back up. And because, a lot of the horses are retired and don't get handled every day. So, I have my little process, and if he'll just let me have a quick conversation with them, I can usually just catch them in like 30 seconds. But, so there's a lot about yielding to win, that if you allow more time, if you just wait a second longer, if you, just give instead of being so adamant about forcing your opinion, your thoughts, your desires. If you just wait a second and you give just a half a second, or whatever it is, take a step back, not push your agenda so hard, you'll normally come out on the end of things much better. So number 14, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. Miss Maya Angelou. That quote was extremely helpful for me in my traditional horse training recovery. Coming to the positive reinforcement side, there was a lot of guilt and a lot of shame of being like, oh my God, what have I done? And what have I been doing to my horse for all of these years? Like, so much stress and anxiety and pain that I have inflicted on my horse, and having to be like, you just, 1, didn't know, 2, weren't ready to hear it, and 3, weren't in a place where you could. You are where you need to be right now. Where you are, how you feel, what you're doing is what you need to be doing. And once it feels like you've outgrown it, or it starts chafing, that it's not really, fitting for you anymore, then you're ready. Then you can change it. And when you know better, you can do better. And that is a big practice of self-compassion. And it was a big deal to me to be like, me changing how I've always worked with and trained with horses, how I've interacted with them, is not admitting that I'm just this horrible person, that I've had all this cruel intent with my horses, that I've wanted to be cruel. It's not me admitting that by changing what I'm saying about myself when I change the way that I work with horses, is that it's more of a show of my dedication to my animal, that I care about them so much so that I'm willing to adjust, to try something else for their benefit, for their betterment. I'm willing to accept my past actions and practice self-compassion. That's where I was at. And it sucks that my horse had to pay for that, but that's the best I could do at the time. I was always trying to be kind to my horses and to do right by them, but I didn't have all the tools I needed at the time. I did, but I didn't know that I did. So that's a big one. And then we move into more of the systemic issues. It's interesting, and I might lose some of you here, so just bear with me. Just hear me out, okay? So a lot of issues in the horse world, I think, come from a lot of systemic issues. So one of the systemic issues in at least Western American culture is a lot of negative feelings towards minority groups, and one of them, which is it a minority or is it the fairer sex, whatever, but the misogyny towards women, that to do things like positive reinforcement is weakness, that you're too tender-hearted, that you need to be firmer, you need to be disciplined, which is reminiscent of a father, that you need to demand respect, again, a father, that, a display of emotions or resistance is inherently bad. It's moody, it's emotional, which is misogyny. So, number 15 is many of the issues in the horse world are reflective of systemic issues in society, at least my pocket of the world. So 16 is mares are not moody. It's not a thing. It's so silly to me that there's this red chestnut mare, the color of the horse has anything to do with what's going on in the noggin. It's reminiscent of cultural values, right? That somebody's skin color or their hair color says something about who they are. It's an idea that got generalized from people and systemic issues to horses. I think it's very reflective. The horse world and society, they show a lot of the same things. So there's that issue, the red chestnut mare. And then the mare part, that they're moody and they're bitchy and they're spicy and opinionated and stubborn, which are all things, of course, that are said about women. But, it's seen differently when the same behavior comes up in a gelding, or if it's similar to that of the mare, then you say, well, he should have been a mare. And it's like, oh, okay, so only the females can be right. Okay. So that's that societal view bleeding into the horses. And what that does, why that's so harmful, is the same thing happens as what happens in women's healthcare. The statistics on how women are treated in hospitals and in just general healthcare is that a lot of their problems are dismissed, that it's thought to be hormonal. And then they don't address the suspected hormone issues. It's thought to be, just all in their head. And then they don't get the care they need. Like, it is literally statistical. It's a statistical reality that happens. And the same thing happens to horses. When mares are being moody, they're just being a mare. Instead of looking for, are their hormones out of balance? Where are they in their cycle? Is there something, pain-wise happening? Does the saddle not fit? Are they experiencing ulcers? Do they need a lifestyle change? Are they getting their nutrition and social and forage and environment needs met? No, they're just moody. So they're damaging concepts, regardless of what you feel about, if we're like moving towards a culture of like being overly sensitive or whatever. I mean, because I know people have different views on politics and societal issues, but like putting that aside, it is a reality that this is what happens, that we call mares moody or, emotional, opinionated, and it all has a derogatory connotation. So regardless of how you feel about those sorts of things, whether that's right or wrong, or the truth that men and women are just really different in that way, that mares and geldings really are just different in that way, the effect is so harmful that, okay, even if that is the case, that mares are generally more, quote unquote, moody than geldings. Okay, but why are they expressing this behavior that is so quote unquote negative? That's, problematic. All behavior has a purpose. That's another point I have. So, okay, fair enough, but saying that they're being moody doesn't give you any path toward helping the horse deal with their emotions. Like, as a therapist, when somebody is having mood issues, we look at them holistically. Okay, what is your diet like? What is your exercise like? How is your social life? How are you managing your self-care and your health practices? Okay, after that, how are you managing yourself emotionally? What are some behavioral things and cognitive things you can implement? What are some processing things we can do? That's not the like conclusion that, okay, the horse is moody. The end. No. Okay, even if that is the case, where do we go from here? How do you address that? Because it's causing problems. Because if the horse is being moody under saddle and you ask them to go and they pin their ears and they throw a kick, then they're going to get beaten. Usually they get spurred, or they get kicked, or they get whipped, or they get turned in a circle, or they get forced to work when they're expressing something. So it's harmful either way. So like, would we rather continue that way, or could we address the actual issue that maybe the saddle doesn't fit instead of just ignoring the problem? So that's my little rant on that. So 17, still on the societal systemic side of things, that softness is not weakness. So this is another thing I mentioned earlier, that to do positive reinforcement and to be soft and kind and have a gentle, compassionate approach to training is not to be weak. A lot of people look at women, particularly in parenting or in the corporate world, and if you're lenient at all, if you have compassion and empathy for people and you allow them some error and you say, that's okay, I get it, let's try again, then you're being weak instead of being firm and disciplined and harsh and fire them or, punish them, spank them. It's frowned upon, and it goes deeper than the practice itself. It's what it is associated with. That femininity is something, that's, I guess, inferior to masculinity, when really everyone has a balance of both. And, some people lean more one way or more the other. And some people are straight up down the middle. It's not a judgment to be masculine or feminine. It is just a part of who we all are. Statistically, as we get older, at least from what I've studied in my courses, and, I could obviously be wrong, but from my understanding, what sort of happens throughout the lifespan is, as we get older, we all sort of move towards androgyny. We all sort of become sort of this balance of masculinity and femininity that, you're neither super feminine or super masculine. We all sort of end up, embracing sort of every side of us. And obviously that's a binary approach, but I don't know that at least I don't have the language for any sort of extraneous elements of self, I guess, beyond masculinity and femininity. I don't know if there's a third. I mean, there's androgyny, but that's sort of the combination of both. And so, from what I understand in studies, in advanced human development, the one class I took, that we all sort of move towards becoming whole, as it were, that you sort of embrace every aspect of your identity as what it means to be a human. So it becomes very inclusive, you know what I mean? Instead of being like staunchly one or the other. And I think that's where people tend to get confused with embracing other people that do not rigidly adhere to the binary. That it gets confusing because you're either male or you're female, and that's not necessarily the case. Especially as we get older and you study people, it's fluid and people change, and some lean more one way or the other, or forwards or backwards, not necessarily just left and right. So, I mean, I think to reel it back to the societal value of femininity being inferior to masculinity, that to be weak in some areas is, not as good, not as desirable, that we need to be disciplined and we need to be authoritarian. But you want the horse to be soft. You want the horse to be compliant. You want the horse to be submissive, which is very paternalistic in relationship. It's very much you as the rider and trainer are the one that disciplines, that has authority, that is dominant, right? And that the horse is to be the feminine, the submissive, the obedient, the respecting, and to be soft and supple in the bridle. But why is the rider not expected to do the same? You're expected to have soft hands and to be quiet, but also, where did that come from? From all of the roughness. I hope that makes sense. It's sort of a difficult topic to sum up into a point. That one honestly could be like an entire episode, but yeah, please take it with a grain of salt. That obviously that's a very nuanced conversation, and it's something that I think deserves a little bit more than I'm able to give in this I guess in this format that I'm trying to like kind of burn through 25 with my throat also being like, no thanks. But yeah, so in the systemic societal issue, that to see things as feminine is to see them as inferior. And how do we integrate that in a way that honors the femininity and the things that are associated with it? Because to be soft with a horse is not to be feminine, but it's the association in our society that makes it, sort of vilified or inferiorified. Hope that's making sense. Let me over-explain it for 10 more minutes. Anyway, number 18, our mental health and traumas and values and ideologies are reflected in our training and riding. So everything that I just discussed, if you are, there's sort of the, I guess a cliche. It's sort of doing it an injustice, but for lack of a better word, that the kid that's a bully at school was bullied at home. Same thing applies to horses and riding. We sort of do what we're shown, right? We do what was done to us, unless we sort of break that generational trauma. Okay. 19. This one is moving more into change and a perspective shift, and sort of away from some of the more concrete stuff. So 19, think in terms of what do I want the horse to do instead of in terms of what I want the horse to stop doing. So like I said earlier with punishment, it is more of give the animal a behavior. What do you want them to do instead? Okay, you want them to stop biting at you. What would you rather them do? Would you rather them stand calmly in the cross ties and not bite at you? Okay, how do we reinforce that? We reinforce the horse standing still with the head between the shoulders, relaxed. The mouth is closed and it is staying out of your space. It is in between the horse's head and shoulders. So you're giving parameters. What behavior do you want to see? Not what you don't want. What do you want? What's another example of a horse doing something wrong? I guess a horse kicking out at you as you walk past it, right? The horse when you walk past, raises a leg and kicks. So you don't want that. But if you just smack the horse learns nothing. What would you rather the horse do? You would rather the horse stand there with all four on the floor as you walk past it. So you can train that, but you also have to address why, in a lot of cases, that's happening. Has the horse been hit when it's been walked past? Is it vigilant? Do you need to work on the horse being more comfortable with that? Do you need to not surprise the horse? It gives you a path forward rather than just punishing and then teaching the horse to suppress the behavior and thus creating potentially a more dangerous horse. Number 20, good riding and good training is very boring and often looks too easy. It looks like it's not fun because it's so easy. That you don't see the blow-ups and the bucking and you don't see how difficult it is. That if you address it from start to finish and you do good training with no holes, there is no room for the blow-ups, no room for the huge catastrophes. There's just trust, comfort, safety, sort of everything wrapped up into one. 21, all behavior has a purpose, and we need to look at what need is this behavior meeting rather than why is my horse XYZ character trait. So instead of being like, why is my horse such a jerk? Why is my horse kicking out at me when I walk past it? What need is that behavior meeting? Is it protecting itself? Okay, so to kick out at me helps the horse feel safer. It feels like it's giving me a warning to not hurt it. So how do I meet that need? How do I teach the horse to meet that need differently? Do I just need to make him feel comfortable in this moment? Do I need to teach a different coping skill? It gives you, again, a path forward to see that all behavior has a purpose, that there's not this adversarial relationship by giving them a negative personality trait, that you're able to be like, okay, so why is this happening? How can I help it forward? 22, my relationship with my horse is my responsibility. So this comes from the word professional not really having a super clear definition in the horse world. With a vet, you know that you're getting a vet. The vet has gone through veterinary school and is a equine vet. Anywhere else in the horse world, you can call yourself a trainer, a body worker, a farrier, a dentist, and while many professionals do get the training, it's not necessarily regulated. So a saddle fitter, the examples go on and on and on. So while we hope that people have appropriate credentials and do continuing ed, there's not really a good governing body of in order to be a trainer, there's ICP, but it's not necessarily up to date because the governing body of equine welfare in horse sport, FEI, says that to ride bitless or bridleless is more harmful to horses and riders than to ride with a bit, when research and science would probably disagree with that. That it is more painful to have the weight of a bit distributed across the sensitive bars and tongue of the horse's mouth than across their nose. And the difference in, soft, wide leather and a piece of metal, But then it's like, oh, it's a safety issue. But then it's like, is it a safety issue, or is the equipment the safety issue, or is the training the safety issue? So then maybe we need to back up a couple steps and regulate the training a little bit better than insisting people use a certain type of equipment. I know Shelby Dennis just made a presentation over this. That's sort of why it's top of mind. So definitely check out her conversations on this if you haven't already. I'm pretty sure she posted quite a few things on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, and I think she did a podcast episode over it, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, so I think on 21 as well, the all behavior has a purpose. Stereotypies are a big one. They're coping skills, that it's not cute or funny that the horse is weaving or pawing, or it's not annoying and a vice that the horse is cribbing. It's a coping skill with something. A lot of times weaning and improper management. Sorry, burp. But yeah, so on 22, that my relationship with my horse is my responsibility. That professional doesn't have a clear definition. It's something that we have to take with a grain of salt. You can be diligent and say, what are your credentials? Where did you study? Oh, that's interesting. And it's an unfortunate reality, but it really is ultimately our responsibility and up to us to investigate and make sure that we're giving and providing the best care for our horses. 23, if you slow down, you'll get there faster. So this reminds me of successive approximation, that if you, instead of attacking this big behavior like starting a horse under saddle, and you go, okay, can you stand still when you're asked? Break it down and make it manageable, bite-sized problems that you can solve together, a puzzle you slowly piece together, rather than trying to slam it all together. If you slow down and take a look at it, you'll be able to piece it together a lot easier. So number 24, when you don't respect the no, you cannot get a real yes. This is consent, folks. No means no. And if you don't respect that no, and the horse, and you override it and force the horse, you're not getting a yes. You're being coercive and using force. And I read this quote that says, when horses say no, their mission is to make us understand, not to make us feel good or bad. So that is reminiscent of many points throughout this episode, that it's not to place a judgment on us or to make the horse our enemies, or that they're being disrespectful or disobedient or rude. They're trying to communicate. They're trying to say, hey, that hurt. I'm confused. I'm scared. I'm not sure. And to let us know, not to make us feel bad and become our adversary. So respecting that no is the only way that you get a real yes. And if you slow down and then you start getting the yeses here and there, it starts adding up, and then you start getting an awful lot of yeses, and then things go faster. So number 25 was a big one for me that I don't know if it's super fair to say that I would go back and change it, but I wish I had been able to be a little bit more mindful about it. So to treasure my passion and honor it, and don't exploit it for, X, Y, and Z, ribbons, sponsorships, money, views, all of that. That intention is everything. The way that I approach horses, I don't want to have to go out and be like, oh, I need to take videos and film, and I should, maybe if I do this, I'll make sure it's in front of the camera. I'll do it one more time. It needs to be for the benefit of the horse, for the training, for us, our relationship, rather than for show. And that is, I think, largely why I've really stepped away from social media, is because I became unable to do that. It changed for me, and that was something really hard to be honest about and to come to terms with. But that my relationship with horses is something that feels like it's a part of me. It's in my blood. It's who I am, and I can't change it any more than any other part of me. And it's something that I want to honor and treasure with the way that I approach it and I handle it. And that's something that I'm finding my way through, trying to figure out my relationship with it. And it's a little difficult, I'm not going to lie, but I think it's really important. And I encourage everyone to do the same. You know, it's hard in the world to approach horses and things that we love and our passion with that, because, you know, there's the old adage, you know, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And that may be true, but also you really run the risk of turning something that has intrinsic motivation to having now extrinsic motivation. And then when your work with your horse becomes about making money, and that's how you're reinforced and that's how you're motivated, then you sort of lose that passion. There's a great book on that called Drive by Daniel Pink. It's all about motivation and talks a lot about things like that, that in our society, you know, we're taught, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And, you know, if you work harder and faster, you'll be better and produce more. That's not true. And, yeah, it's a lot of propaganda, but the science is the science. And again, if you slow down, you get there a lot faster. That if you take the time and you rest, that is actually productive. And believe it or not, you don't have to be productive all the time, because if you're not, you're actually more productive. It's crazy how it all works. But yeah, that's sort of everything, I think. That is 25 things I wish I had known about horses to celebrate turning 25. So yeah, I think, well, we just hit the hour mark. So that is, I think, going to conclude this episode. I want to thank you guys for listening and being a part of the ride for this long. But hopefully I will catch you next Tuesday, even though this episode is late because I'm recording it. It's currently 12 p.m. on Tuesday, and we'll see how fast I can throw this bad boy up. Oops. Thank you guys for listening. I'll catch you next week. Bye.